Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Northwest Ceramic Foundation speaker series. And we're presenting David Lloyd. My name is Deborah Sloan, and I am the president of the Northwest Ceramics Foundation. And we are very pleased you're able to join us, and thank you so much for your patience. I hope you hung on. So first, we've got some housekeeping. The Northwest Ceramics Foundation is grateful for and acknowledges it operates on the land that is the unceded, shared traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. We stand in solidarity with all communities marginalized due to race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or age, and commit ourselves to opposing racism in all its forms. For those who are currently not on our mailing list, we encourage you to go to our website, www.nwcf.ca, and at the top of every page, there's a blue button. You click on that, you'll be taken to a form that allows you to sign up and receive our emails about upcoming events, and we have lots of stuff going on, so please sign up. On March 25th, we'll be sponsoring the keynote speaker, Casey Adams, for the Canadian Clay Symposium, which will take place here in Vancouver or in Burnaby at the Shadbolt Center for the Arts. The Northwest Ceramics Foundation will be manning its mug wall and appreciates all donations of mugs. The sale of these mugs supports such programs as the Maureen Wright Bursary and the Speaker Series, so we thank you in advance. We're also excited to announce that our next speaker event on April 2nd, a panel of 4 artists from the Greater Vancouver region who are of Chinese descent and who were born and raised in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Their talk, the title of which translates to Sharing the Best of East and West with Good Friends. And Yingwei may give us the actual how to say that. Will include short presentations on these artists' work, a group discussion of how their cultural roots influence their ceramics in British Columbia, and a question period with the audience. So please stay tuned. You will be sent out invitations for that, and it will go more smoothly than this one. So for the duration of this talk, we ask that you mute yourselves and turn off your videos, and this will improve the transmission. At the end of the talk, we will have a discussion period during which you can turn your videos back on and unmute yourselves. You can type in questions to the chat function at the bottom of your screen or ask to be recognized during the discussion period so that we can actually speak with you. Please note this talk is being recorded, and we will post this talk on our website, where you will also be able to find recordings of our other Zoom presentations. And now I'm going to turn you over to Yingwei, and she will introduce our wonderful speaker.
Okay.
Balls in your boat.
Okay, great. Thanks, Deborah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yukio Yamamoto, and I'm on the board of the Northwest Ceramic Foundation. I'm very pleased today to be able to introduce David Lloyd, who has been a mentor and inspirational teacher to many in BC. David Lloyd studied Asian art history, Japanese, Chinese, and Korean languages, earning his bachelor's degree from the University of British Columbia in 1974. The same year, he studied ceramics for 3 months with a well-known Japanese potter. For 18 months between 1976 and 1978, he studied at Kyoto University in Japan. Returning to Canada, he taught ceramics at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in Surrey, BC, for 24 years, retiring in 2014. In 1995, he assisted and translated for Dr. Yukio Yamamoto when he came to Nanaimo to supervise the construction of the Noborigama Tozan kiln. Later, traveling with him to Archibray in Montana and to Flagstaff, Arizona, where Yamamoto had built another Tozan kiln. David was an active member and past president of the Fraser Valley Potters Guild, and an exhibiting potter well known for his wood-fired work. He has presented numerous workshops locally and around the world in the US, Korea, and Cuba. Please welcome David Lloyd.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. It's kind of an honor to be here. When I saw the list of the people who had presented in the past, I thought, wow, this is a great company. I don't know why they've got me coming, but everybody's assuring me that somehow I have a place in this group of established artists. What I've done today is tried to select, I guess, about 4 different areas to show you some kinds of work that I've been doing mostly, sometimes work from other potters from various parts of the world. And it kind of follows a theme in the sense that I'm moving from looking at early things where I start to deal with decoration, and I just choose one type of decoration mostly to work through, and then I go on to talking about colored clays and how the colored clays come into colored clay slips, and the colored clay slips become marbled clays. And then I'm getting more involved with the textures and the sort of variations that go on in forms. In getting into wood-fired clay, I get into the texture and the subtleties and less decoration from the intentionality of the potter applying it, and more related to how things are emerging from the good fortune or the bad fortune of the kilns. And so everything is kind of experimental in a way. As you come out, you find your result and you move on from there. So this is kind of a long talk in a way, and I hope not to bore you too much. If you want to get up and go grab something to drink or go away for a while and come back, they tell me that it's going to be recorded. You can check it out later if you want to, but I won't be offended because I won't see you leaving. So they tell me I can share the screen. Mostly what I want to do is just go right away into this long slide preparation, and as I see the images come up, I'll tell you why I've included them or what I'm thinking about. Okay, so my assistants here can make this happen. We'll go way back to the beginning. This is not the beginning. There you go. Okay, so it says, what do we make and who do we make things for? That's part of what I'll talk about, but I'll probably go on to a lot of other stuff as well. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about slip decoration. This is a kind of pattern that I came to fairly early on, I guess. I was just putting white slip onto darker clays and scratching through it. And for a while, I'd started out with things which were just a little bit of slip and a different kind of design. And I ended up choosing this kind of flower pattern that followed me around for a long time. Now I'm trying to move on to the next slide here, and it's not doing it. So technical difficulties. It's not doing it. You know, a lot of the potters that I ran into, particularly those in Japan, had one kind of, they're not being able to move it. There we go. Let's go back a little bit. What do we do? Go? Okay. Here's an early piece from the late 70s. We were actually doing reduction firing in electric kiln. I was working with a Japanese potter who'd come to Canada a few years earlier. His name was Akira Tomita. And I was sharing a studio with him down on Powell Street in the Vancouver downtown east side area. We just put a little bit of porcelain white clay slip on top of a darker, medium dark iron bearing clay body. Drew the designs with pencil and then cut around it with an X-Acto knife. And then put a simple clear type of glaze over it. And this is the kind of stuff we would get. So the jar that you see on the left is the same kind of idea, just slightly different pattern. It's a jar pot that I gave my sister, love my sister. big plate on the sides, only about 13, 14 inches across. It's kind of a fruit bowl, and you can just see the general layout of the design. I'm trying to make the pattern go someplace and fill up a lot of the surface you're going to see, but I wanted it to be a little bit challenging for me to do it. So the overlaps and the underlays of things was part of something I was working on. I think I would have fired this at Kwantlen when I was working as a tech between 82 and 87. So here's a little small cup. At this point, I'm bisque firing the clay first and then putting the white slip on. Makes it a lot easier to carve through. The lines just come with an X-Acto knife. Here again, it's a little bit larger, but it's the same pattern, two different sides of a planter that I gave to my mom. And it's just a simple pattern. So I wanted to try to fill up as much of the surfaces as I could and make it varied as I go around. So the challenge later became, how do you make a different pattern for each piece? And so at some point I came to doing these simple flowers. I'd start out with the main petal that's in the front, sometimes has 3 strokes, do 4 more petals behind it, do the insides of the flower parts and go. So this was just a motif that I tried to use, and eventually I started filling up the empty spaces with crosshatch. Celadon glaze, fire it up, keep it simple. You want to do it quickly enough that it's like sketching with the edge of a chisel. So later I start taking away some of the background. So this little sake bottle and sake cups went to Korea for an exhibition when a bunch of us were invited to go and work with a group of people doing wood firing in Osan in Korea. So this was just one of the pieces. They asked us to put things into a gallery so we could show off and then sell them. So this one, the notable thing is that a lot of the background has been cut away and you're starting to see a kind of carving texture. On the right, you see the address marker or the number for my house and our house in Cuba. And that was much later. So that must have been installed around, I don't know, 2012, something like that, 2013. Waste basket in the house, 2 different sides, one with cross hatching, lots of flowers. You can find my dog down in there where it says Pogo on that one on the left. And then another side of it is just simple flowers. So fill up space. Friend asked me to make a teapot for his sister-in-law and cups. So I thought, well, I'll try to make them something kind of pretty and fancy. So this is a teapot that came from sometime early 90s probably. So I would have fired this at Kwantlen while I was working as a faculty. I try to make things in demonstration whenever possible and follow through with the students so that they would know what the beginning turned into when it got to be a simple cup and saucer too. Celadon glaze was kind of nice and simple. I just changed from the glazes that had been here at Kwantlen for years and invented more that would suit the sort of texture that I was looking for. It says, when the clouds come floating by, I remember the fragrant smell of the rain. So this is just a water jar that you need to lift up so you can get the cups under the spigot. So I started making a bunch of these and I had fun with the notion of water. These are urns. One of my friends who was working at Kwantlen lost her sister a little bit early, and she asked me to make her a really pretty kind of urn for her sister's ashes. And so I put the flowers on it, they were happy. And the one on the right was my mom's urn. She passed away in 2002. She fondness for birds and whatnot. One thing about urns, I make them for a lot of people. I've lost a bunch of friends in the last few years. You never charge for an urn. You just give them gratefully to the family that has asked for them. Here's some of the same pattern on clay, which is not being reduced. One on the left, you see a little bit of coarse material starting to come up. This would have gone into a wood kiln, probably in an area where there was little or no ash effect. And the one on the left is probably soda fired. Probably, I don't remember how everything happened now, but it looks like it was just soda fired. A small pot, basically a decorative thing that you leave lying around. You don't have much function for these, although some people find ways of using them. Here's a bowl or two. the point of showing these is that the one on the left has got a very thin spray of the glaze on it, and that allows the clay color to show through quite dark. And your textures of the carved areas are very tactile. You can feel them and sense them. The more you build up the glaze, the more you go to an olive green color in your clay, and then the slip starts to get a bit of a green tinge. Still crosshatch in the background. I'm struggling to find a way to not get bored and not make it too tedious, so that you might even want to look at the flowers individually and see where they're going and if there's any sense to it. So some come from the top, some come from the bottom, and there's always empty spaces in between. If you fill it up too much, it's just too much. So the same idea comes for sgraffito in pieces that are going to go into the wood kiln. So there's my little son when he was about 4 or 5, I guess. This is quite a while ago. And we're making a wastebasket for his room, and he gets to draw on the slip and cut through it. So there's his work. We were doing inlay when I went to Japan in 72, and then I'm back again in 74 to work for a potter named Matsubara Naoyuki. And it was interesting because the main attention in Mashiko in Japan at the time was to be part of Shoji Hamada's group, or descendants of him, his disciples and apprentices and whatnot. I worked with a guy named Matsubara Naoyuki, and he was actually from a slightly different group of potters in Mashiko. He was with Kimura Ichiro, who had gone and studied in Kyoto. Matsubara later went to Kyoto when he apprenticed with Kimura, and picked up a bunch of influences from Chinese and Korean pots. And he was part of a sort of different, slightly different nuance from what Hamada was doing. So here you're seeing some inlay. Somebody gave me a stone flower stamp that one of the Korean potters we were working with gave me. And so I tested it out until it disappeared in the studio here one day. But this water cup on the right has got just white inlay with an iron-bearing slip for the Chinese character for water. Really simple little cup that I'd given to somebody, and they sent it back to me when he passed away. So this is from about 1978, 79, and the picture is probably closer to the year 1998, 99, something like that. I was doing slips on plaster bats and creating panels of colored slip, which we could then pour liquid white clay over, let it set up, and then we could peel back the slip and have a kind of inlaid print. So you see the nice borders because when the colors went down, they went onto flat plaster. The rough edges of the clay is where we sort of tear it apart. And then once you've got your different designs within this sort of framework of the taped areas, you just set it down over top of a piece of styrofoam with a piece of newspaper in between, let it set up some more, attach some feet on the bottom, and you got a cute little dish that you can clear glaze and put into an electric kiln. So here's another one, and the one on the right's just kind of a standing on a stand plate. But they were all pretty much functional. These little guys are just 3 and 4 inches in size, and I would make them in groups of 4 so that they presented some kind of a set. They were fun to do. Everyone was always different from the others. But these were basically demonstration samples for classes that I was giving at Kwantlen for my second and third semester students. We've been using the same colored slips as engobes. So you're seeing a white clay slip with a wax resist design and a teal slip being put over that. And then this would have been sent to a soda kiln. On the right, you're seeing slips layered up on top of each other, sometimes with just brushwork, sometimes with slip trailers to squeeze on the different colors, and then scratch through it, clear glaze, black glaze on the inside. Pretty simple. It's just about a 9-inch pot. It's not that big, but it was for fun. Here you're seeing cups that say rain on the left. the cup on the right, the far cup on the right was appreciated by a whole bunch of my students. They fell in love with it, and Cheryl Stapleton, I think, was the one that coined the name for it. She called it the rain cup because of the way the streaks of teal were going through. This was Plainsman's 441G clay. I was going to start using this clay as an admix to the clays that I was later using for wood firing. But then you see on the left, I just write the word rain in character and put some raindrops and then send it to a simple soda kiln. So these are all soda fired. Later, I was in Cuba and doing an exhibition because we'd been sent there. I sort of got invited because we were inviting a bunch of Cuban artists in 2004 to come to Kwantlen and spend a month, and we'd do workshop series and working together with the Canadian local potters. We'd sort of team up and do collaborative things and individual things. And they invited me to come down the following year and do an exhibition with one of the artists that I'd worked with while I was in their programs in May of 2004, 2005, later in 2007. So I've been doing a lot of colored clay, which emerged out of colored clay slip tests. When we first started making marbled clay, we were just wedging oxides into porcelain, but it was getting very speckled and it was getting all over our hands. It was kind of messy. So I figured I could get more color and more control of the colors if I started to put stains into slip, mix the slip up thoroughly, get it all blended, pour it out onto a plaster bat, wait 45 minutes to an hour, peel up the clay, and I've got a big ball of colored clay. We divide it up. So I had the students making different colors of clay. We'd all make something different, and then we'd have a big bazaar and trade. So we'd end up with 5 or 6 different colors of clay and then make a bunch of things. So we'd make wheel-thrown things, and you'd see this variety of colors sort of represents what the students and I would have been making for one small session. And so I would realize I was going to have to take some stuff to Cuba for an exhibition that I'd agreed to do. So here I am at the Kwantlen studio in 2007, maybe, not sure. A bunch of thrown pieces. When you're doing the marbled throwing, you've got to scrape every surface off. So you peel off a lot of the mud while you're throwing. And then you have to trim it down and then hand scrape every surface that you've got. So I tended to work with the colors on the outside of the pot rather than using up all the color on the inside. These colors will change when they're fired. So you get a couple of different kinds of blue with the white, simple vases, using the yellows and yellow greens and strange colors like that. The one on the right is really small. It's only a couple of inches tall. You probably saw these in the other things. So a completely closed form because it's fun. Sometimes these are used to make water droppers. When you see the bowls, they tended to get used and they're all serviceable and they'll work just fine. Just using a simple clear glaze and trying to make these things appealing and attractive. So there's a bunch of pieces from the show. This one on the right is, I think, one of the nicest marbled bowls I've ever got lucky enough to get. You never know exactly where your patterns are going to go, but if you work your clay on the outside of the ball of white clay, all your colors will mostly be concentrated on the outside of the pot with a little bit coming over into the interior. Depending on how you set up your colors, you're going to get different patterns inside and out. But you still have to scrape everything away. And you want to try to make the colors that you're working with go together well. So sometimes you'll have really tight patterns and you have to be careful not to have them all blur when the glaze is dissolving the color that comes out. So we had to make clear glaze that wasn't too solvent. So sometimes it's a bit thick, sometimes it crackles. But I like these kind of colors. Simple bottles, kind of pretty. Still have this bottle at home. At the same time that I'd show how to throw clay into marbled pieces, we'd take and roll up a coil of clay with mixed colors and then chop it up into little pieces and compress them down into a cookie. And then we get a disc of colored clay with a curve to it. And then in order for it not to break out, you'd have to put a wrapper around the edges. You take another coil of clay and sort of layer it around top and the bottom of these segmented bits. Put a foot on the bottom upside down. It's kind of time consuming, but that's okay. And then you take a scraper and you hand scrape the whole surface back. So scraping a piece like this would be a few hours of time in total. But it's kind of nice looking, nice color. Different colors each time that you introduce this topic to students, you're trying to find out for yourself what they'll do. So sometimes you use large patterns, sometimes you use small. Sometimes you twist it a little bit more. Sometimes you leave it straighter. So here's one where there's a lot more white showing up. And I kind of like this because it's not as tight a patterning as we saw in the previous ones. This one was soda fired. So the colors often come out more brilliant when you get a soda firing. So these are only about 4.5 inches across. They're fun to make, and I would make them maybe one every 4 or 5 months. So here's another one, upside down. You throw the ring foot on once you've got the form stiff enough, and then you trim the heck out of it, and everything comes up clean and pretty. Cups, a little bit dense on the left, a little bit looser on the right. So soda firing, you can see, makes a difference. The ones on the left are just electric kiln fired. Sometimes you get really dense patterns. Sometimes you just make a whole lot and see what you get. Red was fun. We finally got stains that would give us red, but you got to be careful. You can get to too much red. If you don't glaze it at all, you can sometimes find really fine little textures of the colored clays. But if you've got just smooth lines of color, like you see on the left, then you might as well put a clear glaze to it and let it get really shiny and pretty. And the reward, there's my friend Vin Aurora and his son, Ollie. Vin would buy my cups. I don't know, I thought he could make his own, but he liked to buy them from me, and I was really happy and pleased. And one day he said, I got to get one for Ollie. Have you got a nice little one for Ollie? Oh, I found it. Yeah, okay, cool. Thanks, man. This is kind of odd. This kind of marbling, I once saw something similar to it in some European pots, but what happened here was I took a whole bunch of trim scrap and I just put it into a plaster bat and poured slip over it, colored leftover clay slip, which was a kind of ironish color when it was liquid, but then it fired blue. So once I got the slip poured in over the first layer of crunchy bits of dried trim scrap from marble clay, I dropped a bunch more onto the other side, squished it down, and pressed it into a plate. So it's in my kitchen. You can see it's got an oil pot and a salt pot and a few other things sitting on it. Not very big, but it's fun. It's just another way of using color to make something interesting. Eventually, the colored clays that we were using gave us slips that we could try out on all kinds of things. Because I had to teach hand building as another valid way of working, can't just do everything with wheel throwing here at Kwantlen. I started getting lessons, I guess, by all of these people who came around doing workshops from the various Potters Guilds, and they would show different ways of imprinting the clay, either with texturing tools or with using like a pencil pressed through fabric to make softer lines or whatnot. So I'd be making these kinds of shapes so that we could do pieces to go into our raku firing. We're raku firing every semester. And I wanted to use different kinds of textures and fill them up, not with glaze, but more with colored slips and whatnot, which you could sponge off. So you do all the texturing while the clay is soft, then you make your form, put it together, and then you can press out from the inside and make something that's unique and kind of interesting. So once it's all pressed out, fill it up with colored slip, sponge it back. Cup went into a soda fire, it looks like. That's kind of fun, the zipper cup. So here's one bunch of pots that went through raku. It's just the same technique, using variations on how to texture and press out your clay to make baskets or little jars for things. Not always going to be too functional, but they're fun to make, and it lets the students be more expressive and individualized in the kinds of shapes and forms they're making. So there's another couple of things, little sugar pots. So the textures either go in with a toothed rib, or in case of the one on the right, pine needles. I would make brushes out of ponderosa pine needles and press that into the clay, and then just wrap the clay around into a cylinder, cut it to give it different kinds of feet. The little figure on the left has got 3 feet, sort of a technique I saw from Sandy Peel and Toz's work, soda fire. Soda fire, yeah. Textures of burlap, trying to make something that looks a little bit like zoomorphic, I suppose. I don't know why I was doing horns. People think it's weird. Belly buttons and horns. Anyway, it's only about 9 or 10 inches tall, but it was fun. So again, texturing clay, making cylinders, pushing them out from the inside, coloring them up with some kind of colored slip, and then either clear glaze or soda glaze. So in those days, I was getting to fire with Connie Glover down at White Rock. I'd help her load up the kiln, and we'd sort of fire together, and she'd give me free space. That was lovely. Again, just more of the same idea, using pre-textured slabs, make your cylinders, dart them if you're going to make a shape like this tea bag canister that's in sort of the idea shape of a teapot. It's colored slip. There we go. We're making boat shapes by carving styrofoam, making a plaster mold, and then just pressing into it. It's fairly good size dishes, you can see by the tray with muffins in it. That gives you an idea of the size of them. But the idea of using tape and wax resists was something that appealed to me as another way of varying the design possibilities of colored slips. Wax resist had been with me ever since I started working for a potter in Burnaby in the late 60s. That'll come up. So here we are. I guess we've seen these already. So wax resist designs, colored slips, get a glaze on it. It's a way of decorating that's fast and simple and sometimes kind of expressive. I was making other kinds of shapes, and I'm starting to pay more attention to the texture of the clay itself. The soda firing was giving us all kinds of nice variations. And pretty soon I was going to be getting into a chance to fire with wood kilns, not just these kind of soda atmosphere kilns. So later, I put this in, I guess, because I was showing variations of where taping and slipping and waxing and using colors could come in handy. This is earthenware from Cuba. We were doing some work together with a bunch of the artists. So I was trying to persuade these guys to try different ways of finishing their work. They were in a totally different kind of influence, and I wanted to sort of suggest, well, try this. And nobody really wanted to try this, but I did it anyhow because it was fun. So textured slabs, wrapped, they make nice pots. I like flowers. By 1995, 96, I was starting to work with a group over in Nanaimo, helping out with translation for this man here, Yukio Yamamoto. He was invited to come to Nanaimo to do building of kilns. We tore down the big crane kilns in that sort of Burnaby, New Westminster area. 500,000 bricks those kilns were. And we got 70,000 over to Nanaimo to build the Tozan kilns. Yukio had already built a kiln of the same sort in Flagstaff, Arizona. And Les Beardsley had gone down there, seen it, and he asked Yukio to come up to Nanaimo if he could. So early in the whole thing, I got to be pretty close to Yukio because I was working to translate for him with anything he wanted to say or anywhere he wanted to go or do workshops. I would be his go-to translator because he found that I understood the nuances of what he wanted to say. And then he immediately started throwing me in front of the kiln and saying, okay, you're going to lead this group. You're going to run this shift. Here's what to do. I'll come back in a while. Whoa. And so he had me firing as a shift leader. So I got pretty lucky because I was shown, hands-on personal close-up how to stack and load the kilns at the time, and I got a lot of my own work in pretty favorable places. So here's one of the first big bowls that I got out and a few cups. So we would discuss what the results were and whatnot. So this is what the kilns look like. Pretty big, multi-chambers. The chambers in the back didn't work too well. Very smoky. At the very back on the chimney, they put a kind of scrubber that was supposed to burn the smoke. But what it did was it acted as a kind of dampening effect. It stopped the smoke from running well. It came out the sides. It was terribly tough to fire this kiln. It took us a long time, and we didn't get all of the pots inside of it fired well. But we learned something, and when the chimney scrubber burner shut off one day and everything started firing perfectly, we realized, oh no, the scrubber's gone off. What are we going to do? We had to shut down the firing, but we also realized it was causing us a real problem. When you go to these kinds of firings, you got to take a lot of pots because it's a lot of space to fill up. There was a group of potters who come from this side of the lower mainland, a bunch of potters from Vancouver Island. So we make up a whole bunch of pots. There's my kiln full of bisque. I was already making a clay body that had crushed rock in it at this point and using that as my main thing. So sometimes we glaze with a Shino glaze, sometimes a little bit of celadon, and often we would just put them in unglazed and see what we'd get. So there's a load of pots that I would take for one firing. And I got a lot of pots in. This piece is kind of odd. You don't see this kind of texture much. I was wedging clay one day and it started to emerge as a slab. And oh, I could use that. So I just turned it into a kind of oval cylinder, put a handle to it, and made a basket. I like this pot. It's nice and rough. Just put it up close to the fire in the kiln. That's what I got. These were also in the sort of firing chamber of the kiln. They're only little dishes. They're like 2.5, 3 inches maybe. And I was making sets of 5 so that we could put them for Japanese style eating. Other ones with a little bit rougher edge. They just go in with no glaze and they come out with these lovely fired effects. So the crushed rock coming through my clay melts out and sometimes fuses with the ash, sometimes doesn't. Here I poured some clay slip, porcelain clay slip over the same clay, poured it out, then put a celadon glaze. So it got this kind of high contrast of beautiful fluid celadon look across the rough clay. The bigger plates, 13, 14-inch plates, they show up well. They go in with no glaze, they come out, and then you can use them as trays and whatnot. These are more recent. These are the kinds of things that I've been getting out of the Shadbolt kiln in last few years. Very different feeling from what we got from the Tozan kilns because we're not able to rely as much heavy ash, fly ash. So I put most things in with a simple Shino glaze, not too thick. And then if it's the coarse clay with the crushed rock in it, you see the white specks. If it's the other kind of ordinary plainsman 435 clay, you don't get those specks at all, but you get a nice finish on the glaze. These are the kinds of effects that I really enjoy, where the wood ash spills over onto one side of it, melts down with the glaze. Sometimes you get luster, sometimes you get a high sheen, sometimes you get a very satin look out of whatever you're doing. And then the stones melt out. This one is just about a 6.5, 7-inch bowl, but it's a serving dish that I really, really like. And there's so many places where the look that you get in the ash is different and it's moving, and it's the kind of pot that makes you want to just turn it around and around over and over again as you look at it. So I'm not selling this. I'm leaving it for my family to enjoy forever. I hope it doesn't get broken, but anyhow, it's a nice little dish. Same with this. This is the upside down and the downside up of one bowl. And it's got lots of rich variations in the effects. You don't get many pots that come out of the kiln this way. You get lucky with the space. So when you're choosing where to send yours, to the front, to the middle, of the back section of the kiln, you're still taking a chance. But if you tried making everything decorated first, you wouldn't be able to work with these kinds of looks. So they go in undecorated with a simple glaze, sometimes some exposed clay, and if you get lucky, this is what you get. The upside and the downside of another bowl, and a bunch of things in the background. So you see variations in the way the Shino glazes look. I like it when the pot gets really heavily covered in ash. Sometimes I have to fire them twice, which turns out to be a good thing. You pay for the space, but you get a much richer look. I was watching a program with a Japanese potter from Iga who was putting his pieces in 3 times. His intention was to go 3 times or 4 times, knowing that the more he subjected the pieces to the kiln, the more rich variants he would get out of it. So here's a couple of things fresh out of the kiln. These are just for Japanese pickled vegetables, go on the table back into the fridge, different sizes. But you can see the richness of the ash glaze with the Shino glaze. Old teapots, one with coarse clay, one which is just ordinary clay. But the fire gives you pattern, and if you're lucky, it works out well. Front and back of a cup. The side that's red is in the part where it's not facing the flame. The part that faces the flame gets more ash build up and it bleaches out the porcelain clay soot that's been put onto the coarse clay body. This is from the Tozan kiln, as are these. I think the next slide is just going to be the other side around of these cups. So where there's little direct hit of the flame and ash, you get the reds and the oranges. Yeah, so here's a bunch of cups. The one on the left has actually got a pearl essence. Magdalena Odundo got this as a gift when she came to stay with us. So she's got it. I loved it. It was a beautiful cup. So there's the backside of those cups that we just saw the other side. When you hold them up to your mouth and you use them, you get the feeling of the texture in your hands and you get the feeling on your mouth. It's a very intimate kind of thing. So you see up close these lovely textures that are in the glaze. These are a little bit dry. This is 2017. This firing was a reduction curve firing, I think. And so it's got a different texture altogether. Sometimes you get the fire rushing past the piece so quickly that it pushes the glaze back. What's happening here? Am I running out of time? Have I touched something? Okay. Not particularly great mugs, but they were nice to hold and nice to look at. Squared off cups. One on the right, you can see how the fire is pushed up against this section of the glaze in the middle top. It's just like, they call it fire wind in Japan when it pushes on it that hard. So just a rich variation of things that you can get. Every time it's going to be different. There's the rain cups and another bunch of soda-fired pieces. Mostly that's just the same clay body that we're seeing, just a slightly different effect of the fire. So the texturing is changing to more carving. More soda cups with carving, besides some cups that went to a wood fire. So that would have been Tozan kiln, wood fire pots on the right. Heavy, thick slit. These went to Korea. The potters that was traveling with us to Korea, guys like Gordon Hutchins and whatnot, said, "Man, your prices are way too low. This is no good. You're messing things up for us. We got a normal world price that things have got to go at, and you're just not playing the game. So you got to jack up your prices, man." Okay, sir. Yes, thank you. Tell me. So I jacked up the prices, and some customer came from Singapore and bought these. I thought, oh, nice pots. Anyhow, rich textures. There's those cups again. Sometimes you put a sake bottle into a bowl to see what you get. The bowl got interesting inside, and the sake bottle got interesting as well. The clay on the left is a Bizen type clay, so its effect on the Shino glaze is different. My regular clay with rocks in it on the right has got a kind of satiny sheen to it. You get different lusters. These 5 little pieces that are just meant for small pickles or other things. They're really little tiny pots, only about 1.5 inches to across. Sake bottles and sake cups, because when you hold them, you get to feel all of this stuff. And somebody was asking me to make sake bottles. So I did. On the left, Robin DuPont's kiln gave us this one. Cheryl took that up for me and fired it. And then I was using the Bizan clay on the right, reduction cool, so you get lots of interesting effects out of it. They're intimate things because you handle them and you hold them up to your mouth. When I had an extra cubic foot of space, no, not quite a cubic foot of space in the last firing I went to, I thought, oh, what am I going to fill it up with? I'll make bottles. So I made sake bottles and cups. And so there we are on the left before the firing. I put wax on top of my iron glazes so they won't mess up. They all come out different. So we put them in different parts of the kiln, see what the effects are. I'm trying to get some wrinkled shino, which is reminiscent of another glaze that I was introduced to long ago in Japan, where the glaze cracks when it's drying, and then when it fires, it moves and sort of creates these patterns. So here's a glaze test, trying to get the glaze thicker and heavier, and those are the kind of results. So I'm playing with how to change the shino that I've got to get different versions. These were the kinds of pots that I originally saw when I went to Japan in 1972. I would go to the museums that I could find. These ones were similar to the ones that I could find, either at the Idemitsu Museum or the Nezu Museum in Tokyo, or the Tokyo National, or the Kyoto National Museum. These have got a slip under them, which have been carved through, leaving the whiter clay, and then the shino glaze put over it. The one on the left, they don't know exactly which of three possible kilns it came from. There was a book on shino glazes and kiseto, or yellow seto, and black seto pots that a very wonderful potter named Arakawa Toyozo had written about for a series of pottery books. Anyhow, this is the kind of stuff that I first saw in museums. This one on the left is the first pot that I bought in Japan. It was just in a department store in Tokyo. It's a lovely shino, and you can see where the potter's fingers went into the glaze bucket with, you close it back. So that's the shino that I first got to know, and the shino I ended up with is what you see on the right. Totally different feeling. It's just the basic idea of a shino. Okay, so they fired in a clean atmosphere. I'm firing in a dirty atmosphere. If you fire a thing more than once, sometimes you get unexpected results. I took a standard chemical glaze that we were using at Kwantlen, and then I refired it. So we fired it reduction chrome 910, comes out black with brown edges and whatnot. Then you put it back into a disking kiln, you fire it either at 09 or 04, and then it changes. You put it again into an electric kiln and fire it back up to chrome 9, 9.5, and look what happens. You start to reform the crystals. The more times you fire a thing until you ruin it, you can get different effects out of the same glaze because it still can be transformed. So here's a little tea bowl that one of my friends in Kyoto got lucky to get. Another friend of mine that I knew since my first visit to Japan stopped by in 2015, said, Dave, could you make my wife a tea bowl? I like your stuff there. Could you make my wife a tea bowl for tea ceremony? Yeah, sure, that's a she. Would this kind of clay be okay? So I made it, sent it to him. He sent me a picture of the tea inside of it. Which, so that's the kind of stuff. There's the tea, the bowl that before it got into the bisque kilns, and a bunch of pots go in at once, they come out together. So over the years, we were working on a lot of different kinds of glazes and fired effects and whatnot. When you're going for reds, you have to shop around for a lot of different recipes and try things out and see what you can get. And a lot of the time, you won't get a complete surface being covered with red. One side will be red, one side will be green. It'll run, it'll pool on the bottom. Sometimes it'll be richly textured, sometimes not. So we were trying to get a red that was something we could expect and control out of the kiln. So we'd fire the kiln for reduction for using a cone 010 for starting our glaze reduction. And it would just catch the copper reds. So we were firing everything at once in the same kiln, no matter what kind it was. Depending on the glaze, we'd load the kiln from the top or the bottom with different kinds of glazes. So we're looking for reds and knowing that if we fired it more than once, the crystals would rearrange, or sometimes if it was very thick, you'd start to get different patterns inside the glaze itself. In the middle, you're looking at the natural oil spot glazes that come from the silts of Okanagan Lake. We call them oil spot glazes, but they're a little bit different from the traditional Chinese oil spots. So we're making these natural materials, find them, do what we can. The stone that's in my clay body on the right is from pink granite that I pick up off the side of the road near what used to be called Shaw Springs, just above, or Jade Springs, just above Lytton, which got all burned out. So there's a road cut up there with pink granite. There's what the granite looks like, and you can crush it up in a rock crusher and then sieve it, and then mix it into your clay, and when you fire it, it comes out like that. So that when you find it in nature, first it's got that high color. You bisque fire it, and then you can crack it up and mix it. So I put about 12% or so into my clay body, kind of overkill. And there's my boy. He loves to play with the machines that mix the clay, and he likes to wear the equipment on his face because it makes him feel like a spaceman or something. I don't know, it's kind of fun. So those are the kinds of materials that you're going to find in nature. You can't just go up and steal it from anywhere because like it's somebody's land, and there's some questions about how you accept and borrow it. So just take really small amounts for the test amounts to learn about it. If it's your land, then I guess you can do it. Or if it's somebody's land and you can ask for permission, then they can let you take it. But we're going around sampling. I was teaching students how to find it. So it's kind of an educational thing. I started doing this with Akira Tomita in the late 70s, and he found these kinds of things around Penticton. And we just started experimenting, and then we looked all over the southern interior to see what kinds of silts we could find. These were glacial washouts that came thousands of years ago, formed lake beds, and then the lakes went dry or the edges broke, and then the deposits were exposed. So you find some near Spence's Bridge, some near Penticton, some all around Kamloops. You can find them all over the place. So that's the kind of glaze you're going to get from that. Cone 9.5 in oxidation. Here's an interesting glaze. You can see the cut in the middle of the one. I found this about 8 or 10 kilometers out of Spence's Bridge up the Nicola Valley. And they give you this just gorgeous natural Temuku black just by itself. But if you put it into a mild reduction, you'll start to get hairs for Temuku effects. And if you just go into a full reduction, it's just mirror luster brown. It's not that really attractive. But so if you learn to use it just right and apply it well, it's quite a lovely natural glaze. You don't have to add anything to it, just some water and then sieve it. Looking at the effects of soda on pots like the one on the right, a bit of ash and a bit of soda, let me think that you could just put a piece in with no glaze, and if you fire it more than once, you'll start to build up the soda. So this water droplet, you just got a couple of firings of soda on from the Shadbolt soda fire kiln. This is a much thinner coating. One time firing candle covers, I would make them using doeskin mold. So these kinds of pieces all were generated out of first semester demonstration pieces for my classes at Kwantlen. Just make something with panels of doorskin and then the slabs built up against it. So I had some fun. Here we're looking at the big difference between glazed and unglazed, I suppose. The Tesha iron red glaze and then a Novo pot without it. One's good for function because you can clean it really easily, goes in and out of the oven well. The other one's got so much opening in the surface of the clay and glaze that it's good for drier foods, but you got to clean it out well. Still serviceable and it's kind of fun to look at. Nice to hold, lots of richness. Put it in sunlight, it shows up well. So when we started doing reds, we were looking at ways of trying to get either purples or purple and red. So this glaze in the middle has actually got a celadon glaze over top of a copper red glaze. And the copper red glaze had some cobalt in it. So it was playing variations of purples and reds, depending on how you fire it. So by the time you get to a nice, better, what I would think of as a better red, it's looking like this on the right. And this was a recipe that came out of a Ceramics Monthly 92, Tim Gallucci's dependable red. I think that's what it was. Same kind of glaze, different pot. Friend sent me a picture of her vase. It was hard to get a nice controlled, even red over the whole piece. Making celadon glazes for functional things, simple pots. You cut it, you bend it, you fold it, you squish it together. So the pitcher is just a perfectly pouring water or milk pitcher. It's just a lovely little thing. These are the celadon glazes that came out last year when I was getting pieces fired at Plastics Arts in Kwantlen, where I have been teaching lessons. So Gloria Hahn brought me this recipe of one of her friends' celadons, and we put it on and saw what we could get. So that's just cone 6 reduction celadon. A lot of texture just from chisels. When you got all the time and you don't care about whether you sell them or don't, you can put a lot of time into decorating pots. This is from the first bunch of pots I ever made. This is like 1968, 69. I was working with Gary Crawford. I'm showing it partly because the glaze is interesting and rich. This is cone 7, barium copper matte glazes. But you see this darker blackish and bluish kind of color. The very first week that I was working with him in 67, he was having me put on a clay slip that came from a nearby creek and was just added 4% copper carbonate into it. So we put that onto the pots, then carved through and put whichever glaze we were working with on it. So it was a way of doing texture and color differences at once, but it was my first introduction to using natural clay slips. It seemed a good idea. So water pitchers. The one on the left there is the one that's in my fridge all the time. We use it all the time. Keep water cool, put it on the table. They're small. It's a nice format. But why do I make them? Because my students keep asking me, could you show us how to make a pitcher? Can we make jugs? Yep. And so we throw them, we talk about what makes it pour well or doesn't pour well. And they're all of a relatively small size so that it's not too intimidating. The students can try making them at that size. And these all have slightly different approaches to the rim and top and different kinds of firing. So, but the pour well, they're lovely to use. What do you suppose? You got a kiln, we'll take something that big, lay it on its side. I needed an umbrella stand because the other one got broken by somebody. So that's what we get. Rough clay, thrown in 3 pieces, textured to hide where you join it, put it into the kiln. These are kind of fun for me. I don't know if anybody really cares about them. This is for stove side oil. You're going to just put a little bit of oil into your frying pan when you're cooking something. So it's easy to load up. The top doesn't fall off and it doesn't drip all over the place. If it does, you got a little dish underneath. There's a salt caster that you just shake side to side and the salt comes shooting out the little holes. So they're kind of fun. When I want to make these big rectangular plates, you can't use up a lot of floor space in the kiln. They get mad at you for putting so many low flat things in. So I started standing them up and that got me higher up in the kiln. But it also got a different approach to how the wood fire affects the pots. So you can see laid up, getting ready for the kiln, inside the kiln, and then a fire goes out. And then you get to use them. This might be a different version of the same plate, but this is how we're setting up for a nice little lunch every once in a while. Lots of different pots with different textures, different colors. That makes my life more fun and more interesting. Butter dishes. Somebody said, Dave, make a butter dish. How do you do it? I had to figure it out. So I just based it on the size of a block of butter and figured how to square it off. Simple cone 6 reduction, underglazed blue oxide with a white glaze. Somebody working at Plastics Arts, a nice Polish lady, wanted to have a particular design for something for making a kind of curdled milk food, kind of quark or something like that. And so she wanted me to make her a pot that she could press the stuff down on. So fired the lid upside down and then put a plate under it so it wouldn't drip all over the place. And that's just kind of responding to the requests and the needs of what somebody brings you. Can you make this? Sure, let's make everything possible. Somebody wants goblets, there come the flower designs. We're making marbled clay. This was all leftover colors from Kwantlen after I stopped teaching in 2014 or so. There was a bucket of unprocessed, thrown away bits and pieces of colored clay. I separated them all out into general colors, tested them, and then started making pots. So I got about 50 pots out of the scraps left over clay. But these went into soda fires, so the colors vary as the pot turns around. They're fun. You have to decide whether you want really textured clay to drink from or something really smooth. I think both are beautiful, but they're beautiful in different ways. Yeah, some people are going to have a taste for one thing, others for another. Collaborating is something that we did a lot of. When you're teaching people, you're taking a bit of idea of the information they give you, and you're adding your part, and you come up with something. This is from a big mural, a 601 tile mural. It's in the Kwantlen Library here at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. 30 or more students and Potters Guild members joined together in 2008, and we made 35 different patterns of tile, and then made molds for them all and pressed them out in huge numbers. We had close to 1,000 by the time we were finished, and we used 600 on this 3-story high mural. So collaborating allows you to not own the responsibility completely or the end result of things. And when you put all of your stuff together, you can get some pretty amazing looking results. So this is this big, beautiful wall that catches sunlight in a certain kind of way. And that's what it looks like when you see it up. And there's some individual close-ups of things. So nice project, took us a long time. We installed it over the February break when the university was closed for the Olympics. Here's Gary Crawford. He was the potter that I went to work for in 1967. He was pretty young at the time, early 30s. And after he left his home studio and moved off to a condo with his wife, he would come and work in my studio. And we just maintained this lovely friendship. His family took me in his family. They made me feel like an undesignated family member, and all the way up till now, I still feel that way. Wonderful guy. He was a lovely potter, and just a great friend. Here's some things that he made. So I was doing a workshop in Thwath in, I forget, 2015 or something, 2015. And one of the participants had some pots that he had made, these wax resists with a simple slip over the top of the white glaze. One of them was a collaborative piece that we did together. We sometimes he'd make a pot, we'd start decorating it together, start slashing through the mud slip, and then put color over that, and then glaze it. And so often I would be glazing his pieces or decorating them, and we would be just working together. It was fun. It was a nice introduction. He had this picture of Hamada showed you in the studio, and when he left the studio, he gave me the picture. And it reminded me of how studios worked with lots of potters together. So a lot of these pieces wouldn't have necessarily been started by Hamada Shoji. He had 7 people working with him. And so they'd bring the pots bisque and he'd do the decorating. The same thing happened at the studio where I was working. Upper right, there's a piece by Matsubara Naoyuki, which is a simple iron brush work with a bit of splashed ash glaze added on for texture, and then the namijiro, or the wrinkled white glaze that we did hundreds and hundreds of pots with in the background. I put the water cup in because it was while I was at Matsubara's place and we were sampling out different decorative techniques. I was doing my first inlay. So influences come at you and you don't know what you're absorbing when, but later it comes back to haunt you. Collaborating. We had the empty bowls projects that went on for years, and we'd get our guild members to make 15, 20 pieces of each. We'd fire them. Sometimes we'd fire them at the Kwantlen kiln. When everything would come out, they'd take and give them all away. It was a fundraiser. We had wheel throwing bowl throwing competitions for a number of years too. And so I would at least get 100 pieces every time we did that. But here's a group of the guild members who've come to see the stuff before it gets delivered. So I went to Cuba because the Cuban artists were coming here and they asked us to make some shows and whatnot. So the Gallery Oriente in the downtown part of Santiago de Cuba, where we were, Alfredo Verde wanted to do a show with me. So the following year after my first visit, we put together a show. Much of that stuff was done in the winter. So there's Alfredo and my lovely wife in the background there. Here's a couple of his pieces. He's working on, what are we going to say if we have to speak at this thing? So consulting with the other artists in the garden of Taller Cultural in Santiago de Cuba. These are the kind of demo pieces that I would have made because we show each other what we're doing. The strange piece with the mule on top and the odd looking figure handle. That would have been a collaborative thing using doorskin molds to make different shapes, carved pots for teapots with a bamboo root, hand-built cups, wheel-thrown cups. This bowl that we see turned up comes out like this. So it's earthenware with fresh colors added on. I'm showing them brushwork and slip trailer and wax resist designs. And so we made a show. So there's earthenware with different kinds of window pictures and wax resist designs. We could set it up however we want. My wife was doing the curating because she was a gallery curator at the time. So we got this interesting show space. The cups that I'd shown earlier, I don't know if it's from this show or from the other show. I did a couple shows there. More techniques just to try to introduce fun, cheerful things. All these cups were given away to the other participants who were doing the shows and for the ones working in the group that we were with. So talking about collaborations, this piece here, Jose Berenguer, who's in the goggles looking forward, he did most of the sculptural additions to this piece. I did the figures, and the guy in the back with the welding equipment added on his parts. The person curating the show didn't want to recognize that more than one artist could be involved. They said, well, you who made the pot that we did it on, you don't count. And you guy who did all the welding work, you don't count. The artistry goes to Berenguer. And they couldn't get over their sort of preconceived idea that it was one artist's work and the other people were just helpers. But there's the piece as it showed up, and we just kind of talked through the whole thing as we did it. It was a way to discuss different ideas about how the environment was being trashed and how there was responsibilities in the cities to look after it. So the conversation we had. Friends want dishes made and make square dishes. The backside's got a texture because there's no glaze on the underside. Make a simple styrofoam form. Make a doorskin mold frame around it, pour plaster. You can see a bunch of dishes in the back that are bisqued already. So this was for plaster. They wanted a bigger plate, so I made some more plaster. There's what the texture looks like as it's just pressed into the molds. Do a lot of molds, do a lot of plaster bats. So here's plaster bats getting made so that you can recycle your clay. I recycle clay every time that I'm doing something. So this is just like one day's throwing and trimming my put back together. You can see the frames. They've got galvanized roofing nails in them. And then when you pour them, you've got a fixed amount of plaster going in. It's very efficient. You just measure everything out. You know how much plaster to mix and pour, how the timing goes. So I made about 15 plaster bat frames for my plastics art students last year. And I'm not making any more, so they got the last year. We made them thinner, so they're less weight. So a full-size bat like the green frame is about 40 pounds. But the ones with the lightweight yellow cedar frames, they're only an inch thick and they're only about 21 pounds. There's my signatures of my pots. Over time, they change a bit. The Chinese character Kan, I borrowed from the Chinese bamboo painter that I was studying when I was a graduate student, Li Kan, and that's it. So I don't know how much time. I think I've taken a lot of time to do this. It's run on, and I guess if they're going to open this up, you can ask whatever kind of questions you want. And here's just some birds that are swinging around for the next little while. Did everybody watch me while I was talking?
I'm sure.
I'm sure, okay.
I think we will have some chat on the side.
Did anybody see this? Is there any response back?
Deborah,
Did it record?
Yeah, here I am. Oh, there's Jen.
Hey, everyone. Deborah, you could go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you so much, David. It was
Oh.
lovely to see the evolution and all the different things you've tried.
Mm.
And I guess one quick question. We're hoping that I think Jen probably has it better organized, but if people, we only have a few minutes for questions, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Perhaps you raise your hand and we can ask you in the Q&A or in the chat. And my question would be, how much has the language you've learned various languages, how has that affected your insights?
Yeah, it's huge because it got me close to a lot of interesting potters. First, when I went to Japan in 1972, I had very little language. I was struggling quickly to pick it up. And then I went and spent a week in Moscow, and I had to get real quick about learning. But I made a deal to go back 2 years later. So in 74, I went back for 3 months. And I'd been studying at university, picking up Chinese and Japanese. So I was reading a lot. But 3 months working with potters in Moscow, I had to speak Japanese all the time. And it got really a lot more fluent. I could hear things, learn quickly. And then I could meet people. So I actually got to meet Hamada Shoji on the last day that I was in Moscow in 74. And he said, "You speak Japanese?" "Yeah." "Okay, well, let's go." So he was showing me around. Then he decided, "Now, your Japanese is not as good as my English, so we'll just go in English. Don't worry about it." But having been in a situation where I have to speak Japanese all the time made me learn my Japanese a lot better. And then I went back to school, did some more graduate studies and everything. And then I was working with a Japanese potter, Akira Tomita, after my 1.5 year study in Japan at Kyoto, just doing research. But when I was back, I started getting requests from Japanese potters who were visiting here, and they needed translators, and I had the sort of language of the potters, so I could work with them. And then I got to meet these really cool and interesting upper echelon potters, and then I would see them at Ensika's and other places, and they were really, really generous and good to me. So then I get introduced to more people. And so when I was working with Yukio, I got introduced to all of these amazing wood fire potters and other potters from America. And they were very good to me. And so because I was hanging out with these guys who were doing good stuff, interesting stuff, I had just more access to information and question and answers. And they would let me get invited to firings, and I could learn more. And that got me in. Once I was working with the wood fire potters, then the Korean potters came along, and they wanted somebody who would help translate. And by that time I was studying Korean because I had a lot of Korean students, I had Korean friends. So I'd taken up Korean while I was teaching at Kwantlen, and somehow being able to use that language was great. When I went to Cuba, I had no Spanish, but we were inviting the Spanish artists to come here, and 3 of them stayed at my house, so I had to learn Spanish right quick. Plus, I kind of met my future wife, and I had to learn Spanish really quick for that. So you just do what you got to do. But that gave me access right away to a lot of artists who weren't just potters as well, and a lot of people. So then you get into the subtleties and the nuances of everyday life in that language. Gives you reading as well. So I was reading books in Chinese, I was reading books in Japanese, and occasionally in Korean, and then Spanish, no problem. But yeah, language is really helpful, and it helps you to get at what are the sensibilities of all the different people and the cultures. It's rich.
Thank you. I think Jen, you might have better control over this, but I think there's somebody who asked Alicia.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Uh,
Jen, can you find that question?
Throughout your entire career, what's your most precious
Yeah,
achievement? Is
there.
that it? Wow.
Yeah.
The best thing that you get out of all of this is all of the wonderful people that you meet and the way they affect your understanding of your own life. And I mean, it's humbling when you see how much other people have learned and accomplished and done with their own lives. It sort of inspires you to want to do more and do better. And I think, if anything, I've just tried to become a little bit better of a person, tried to become a little more grateful for the great opportunities that have come my way. A whole lot of people have helped me out a lot. I'm extremely lucky. I've got like a house to live in. I've had good jobs where I didn't have to struggle to apply to get them. I got to be a tech at Kwantlen out of 55 applicants. They interviewed 5 and I had no idea what the job even was, but they liked me and they hired me. And they let me interview for faculty and I went away, and when I came back a year later, the faculty position was open. I had no credentials. I got lucky. I could take 2 sections and build it up to 4. And then they said, but you got to do this. If you're going to do it, you got to get university transfer. You got to fill in all of these different areas of style and personal style and qualities and things that people have got to make, like a regular art school. You can't just be a potter. Oh, okay. So I figured out how to do it with the help of so many people who are just so good to me. And so I've lived a charmed life in that way. And I guess the achievement is the people that came to me, the people that I got to meet as students who are just wonderful, wonderful people. It's a total rich life I got. Yeah. So
Good. That sounds like a good answer. I think many ceramicists feel the same way. Yeah, it's a good life. Yeah.
the ceramic artists we meet are often multi-talented and deep and thoughtful and caring. They've got lots of great values. It's a wonderful group. I remember going to Santa Fe on workshops a couple of times, and I would end up with the Texans. And the Texans were drinkers and they were partiers, and I wasn't, but they were so warm and gregarious and friendly. And so everywhere I would go on an MC, I'd end up with the Texans. Great group.
So the potters are social animals.
Yeah.
But we only have about 3 minutes or 2 minutes left. I think I've answered. Have we tapped into all the questions? I'm sorry, I can't turn on my video, so.
We have a few more questions here.
Jen.
Marion Dobson is asking, what has been your most memorable wood firing and why?
Oh, the most memorable firing was not even a great firing. It was in Flagstaff, Arizona. We got sent up to the front of the Nobori kiln, the climbing kiln there, and Yukio was making me be like a firing leader, and I had very little experience at all. And there were all of these really experienced firers from the Midwest who were upset and irate because I was being pushed into the place where they thought they should go. And it was so emotional after 6 or 7 days of firing that I just, when the firing was over, I just broke down in tears. It was just so dramatic. It was so amazing. There's another firing in Korea where the kiln collapsed in the middle of firing. And everybody was seeing their light flash in front of them, but we had to quickly throw mud over the top of it, get the thing to cool down. Then they said, no, let's finish the fire. Let's finish the fire. We're almost there. So,
Oh, wow.
I guess I've been in about at least a dozen different wood kilns, luckily. And I don't own a kiln. So, you know, it's great to be able to get wood firing if you don't own your own wood kiln.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? Jen, do you see?
No more questions, but a lot of thank yous in the comments, David, for amazing talk and beautiful work and your generosity. So that's in there. And if anyone else would like to raise their hand, I'm happy to let you ask a question, but otherwise I think that's all I'm seeing.
Okay, well, if that's the case, I don't see a raised hand. Thank you so very much. And once again, we put David through the ringer. We were trying to get this thing on the road, mainly just some technical stuff. And Jen Wooden saved us. So thank you, Jen. And thank you, David. And thank you for your fantastic contribution to ceramics in BC over so many years, and you're continuing. And it's been wonderful to watch how things have unfolded for you.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a percentage of what I was doing, but it's kind of an, kind of goes together, I guess.
Yeah.
Thanks for everybody who took time to check it out.
Yes, and thank you to Ingwe and to Kwantlen College for being the hosts.
Yeah.
And we will see you all, I hope, on April 2nd. And thanks again so much. Okay, I'll shut the meeting down. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.